Hello, my name is Diego Chavez, and my presentation is titled The War in Yemen. Now, to begin, I'd like to define our major stakeholders within the long-lasting conflict. The conflict has taken over the country of Yemen and has resulted in a long-lasting war that involves independent countries, terrorist agencies, governing entities, and corrupt elected officials. Now, looking at some background and the origins of the conflict, we can see that the conflict is between the Yemeni government and the Houthi rebels. The Houthi rebel group was an organization that was established a long time ago. They held beliefs that opposed the President Saleh. However, after President Saleh began working with the United States after the 9/11 attacks, allowing their military to operate in Yemeni land, the Houthi rebels began to execute their premeditated attacks on Saudi Arabia and began to revolt against the government. In 2009, during this time, Iran began to supply the Houthi rebels with military support, guidance, weapons to start getting bigger and to start recruiting more members. And in 2011, a big event happened called Arab Spring, when neighboring countries urged resolutions to occur in Yemen, which is when Iran and Saudi Arabia saw this as an opportunity to pick sides. In 2012, President Saleh stepped down and transferred power to President Hadi. In 2004, the government became weak enough. However, the Houthi rebels became strong enough to take over the government, which is what they did. And in 2015, the Houthi rebel group remained in power and led with oppression, misogyny, fear, and hatred. However, in March 2015, Mohammed bin Salem, crown prince of Saudi Arabia, led an invasion that cut support coming into Yemen, while they recruited support from the United States to back them up with their military weapons, tanks that they needed. In April of 2015, terrorist entities such as the AQAP and ISIS started to try to take over. However, the United States attacked both of them and took those terrorist groups down. In September 2015, an attack was done by Houthis terrorist group, which killed soldiers in the Saudi Arabian land, which was met with a violent response from Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salem, and with 130 airstrikes to homes, schools, and hospitals. There was a lot of active forces within Yemen around this time. For example, Southern Transitional Council tried to take power in southern lands of Yemen with no success. The United Nations tried to intervene with safety and peacekeepers, of course, with no success. And with active war happening in the Middle East, the Houthi rebel group started to provide support to Palestinians by attacking Israel in support and a call for a ceasefire in Palestinian land. This is a quick map of um, Yemen. We can see that the Houthi rebels are up northwestern. Down here is the STC. There, of course, the Houthi rebels are backed by Iran, bordering the Saudi Arabian country, and of course backed by the United States. Here we could see the AGAP and then the ISIS. So a lot of active forces. And for the humanitarian impact on the people, we can see that there's an estimated 4.5 million people, about 14% of the population displaced, 18.2 million people in dire need of humanitarian aid, tens of thousands already living in famine, and over 377,000 were directly or indirectly caused to die by the civil war and humanitarian crisis in Yemen. And of course, the involvement, Saudi Arabia and the United States are responsible for the active forces that kept attacking the Houthi rebellion group. But of course, Iran is also to blame by supplying the Houthi rebel group with all these military forces and guidance that enabled them to go against their government. And there are a lot of obstacles to attaining peace within the government. For one, the government is far too weak over a decade of civil war. There is not enough structure within government. Political tensions are too high, too many competing factions over Yemen, and there is no true consensus of what is to be done with Yemen. Additionally, the Saudi Arabia and Iran, they have caused a regional proxy war, which resulted in lack of accountability that is very needed in addressing this very active and very dire situation. For my proposed policy implementation, I propose that all major stakeholders involved within this conflict are to be held accountable. For one, Iran is to be responsible for supplying humanitarian aid to Yemen, as they were the ones who supplied the Houthi rebel group with military forces to stabilize the government within Yemen. The United States and NATO must intervene to provide government reform centered around constituents and people so that there are no civil wars that continue to ensue. Additionally, to ensure that there is a government that considers all stakeholders, we must practice democratic values in Yemen while giving the Houthi rebel group with a political party and autonomy so that there is no additional clashing and conflict. Additionally, to ensure that the United States were to be in support, we would have to get rid of sanctions in other countries that support the Houthi organization in the Middle East to strengthen the relationship with the United States that they have with the Middle East to incentivize them to provide their support. And being that the Yemeni government is in support with Saudi Arabia, a ceasefire would need to be agreed upon so that no violence is actively practiced on this land, and that peace and a new government could potentially be moved forward. And looking at the ways that Yemen has been affected by this civil war, we can see that voice and accountability, control and corruption, government effectiveness, political stability and absence of violence, regulatory quality, and rule of law have all been degraded because of this civil war, as we can see on this graph. So it is extremely important that all international forces and forces that are responsible for this war are held accountable in a way that addresses the issue in hopes of attaining a solution. Thank you so much, and that was my presentation. These are my references. Thank you.